Okay. So hello everyone. It's really great to see you all here. And this is our first event of the Early Care Bioethics Network. So to keep it very quite short, this network is set up with the explicit aim of bringing together scholars, especially Global South scholars and early career scholars around the globe. This network has been organic in its conception, where many of you are involved, and we hope that ECRs and experienced scholars, we support each other and make ECRs feel that they belong, especially for Global South scholars in bioethics discipline, definitely. So coming to this much awaited event on mentorship and its boundaries, I will start with Gayatri Spivak, who says it best in the book, The Outside the Teaching Mission. I quote, persistently to critique a structure that one cannot not inhibit is a deconstructive stance. This is why it is especially important to choose as an object of critique something which we love or which we cannot not desire, cannot not wish to inhibit, however much we wish also to change it. So in academia itself, as we all know, like power and knowledge production have been heavily theorized. And as we know that academic privilege affects people differently depending on their status within academia, whether it could be a tenured professors or adjunct professors or graduate students or undergrad students. So it becomes very important and apparent how privilege and power are distributed differently in academia when you add intersecting identities. For example, as we know, like race, gender, disability, class, and caste, all these larger intersectional factors, and of course, the larger social injustice. So the keys of this session is the goal is to look at how academic demands and expectations are distributed differently within neoliberal academia through the lens of mentorship and mentoring. Whether you are like we all know, we take up a roles of mentors or as mentee. So we all navigate and also resist certain ways of neoliberal practices and also are very reflective about this. So that's something is what the key purpose of this session is, to reflect and think and also learn from each other from different roles which we occupy in academic world we live in right now. So before diving into the conversation, I would like to quickly give you an overview of the session and also briefly introduce the panelists here. And so as I said, like each panelist will share a quick 3-minute opinion, like once I finish the briefly introduce, and then we continue the conversation. So Ainsley Newson is a professor of bioethics at the University of Sydney. Her research critically considers ethical issues in genomics and related technologies, specifically how they can be used well in research, clinical, and population health settings. So I'm sure we all have known her for many years here, and she is in the field for over 25 years. And she has been actively supporting next generation of bioethics scholars, including promoting equity of opportunity. And she has been part of IAB, and many of our, this network, Early Career Bioethics Network scholars has been closely engaging to support ECRs through this network too. So Yantina De Veres is an associate professor in bioethics in the Department of Medicine of the University of Cape Town. Her expertise is in the ethics of African genomics research. She has been actively supporting early career scholars by providing platforms to have critical conversations, as well as networking forum at the department, which I have been also benefited. So that's how I know her too. Muthoni Mwangi is from, is a lecturer from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. She's a faculty member at the School of Law, Department of Law and Science and Technology. She has been working closely with students on legal writing and also been involved recently in bioethics projects. And she's actively looking for platforms which would facilitate different disciplinary voices in bioethics. Sunita Bandevar is the General Secretary of Forum for Medical Ethics Society India and serves on the core editorial team of Indian Journal of Medical Ethics and heads the newly established program Institute on Health, Ethics and Law. This is very specifically for training, research and advocacy. So I have known her since my PhD years too, and she has been actively supporting many early career scholars, including me, through different ways of collaboration. So the last but not least, and I know her since very recent, since last year, Tess Johnson is a Glide postdoctoral researcher in ethics of pandemic preparedness, surveillance, and response. She is trained bioethicist based at Ethos Center, University of Oxford. Since last year, we have been in touch, as I said, and it's great to see the support system she's involved in and extending for ECRs within Global South too. So we have this amazing panel today, and as I said, everyone here has been involved in different capacities to support ECRs in bioethics. And of course, each have been reflecting on many aspects of mentorship, as I'm aware. So here is a question to kickstart the conversation to all the speakers here. And each of you have maximum 2 to 3 minutes for this question. What does mentoring mean to you? And could you share experiences of whether you're being a mentor or as a mentee, which played an important role and also maybe influenced you? Ainsley, could you want to please start off with?
Sure, I'd be happy to go first. This is a really important question, and it's one that I think it's going to be hard to do justice to in 3 minutes, so I better get going. In terms of what mentoring means to me, I think it doesn't matter for me if you're the mentor or the mentee, but it's a chance to share experience, to solve a particular problem, usually brought by the mentee, kind of learn a bit about the rules of the game from the inside, from someone who's done it maybe at the same time as you or before you. And you can learn how to sort of different rules and strategies with a person who's neutral, in the sense that the person don't have a stake really in what happens afterwards. So they can do this wholeheartedly, open-heartedly, and they can offer advice with, if the advice is wanted, with the specific interests of the person seeking the information in mind, and obviously having clarified what that is in advance. It's also a chance to build and grow networks and to hear other experiences, sometimes from within the setting where a person is, sometimes from elsewhere. It's also a chance for mutual learning and understanding, and a chance for mentors themselves to critically reflect on where they've come from and how they've got to be there, and what's happened to them in the process. I also think mentorship can be a short-term thing or a long-term thing. You can have mentoring relationships that last a long time, some that last much shorter, either because that's what they're designed to do or they peter out before then. And petering out can be fine as well. And I think the engagement can be different levels as well as formal or informal. So that's kind of what it means to me, I guess. Trying to draw that together is support, but support on a footing that is mutually agreed. And in terms of my experiences, I've done quite a bit, both as a mentee and a mentor. And I was just going to reflect really briefly on 2, but I've got 40 seconds left. So as a final year PhD student, I had a fabulous mentoring relationship with someone who was really pragmatic, not quite in bioethics, but understood enough about bioethics just to really help get me over the line. And that person was such a great sounding board and a really neutral, unemotional person for me just to kind of take my strung out self to get my thesis finished. And that was a really great, very welcome relationship. And then I was a mentor for the International Association of Bioethics World Congress in 2020, and I met some people, including, I won't name them, but I think there's at least one person in this call that I spoke to as part of that process. And I think I met with 5 different ECRs and PhD students, all massively talented in different ways. And I really enjoyed that. It was in the middle of lockdown, and I just got so much out of meeting people that I would have probably not met had it not been for that formal program. And so I still follow them all on LinkedIn and Twitter and see what they're up to. And even though it was designed to be a short-term engagement, it was really lovely just to offer some quick fire advice. So that's a couple of experiences. I've gone 26 seconds over time, I'm sorry, but hopefully some stuff there to kickstart the conversation.
Thank you, Ainsley. I'm sure there are certain threads which I would like to go back and we can talk more. Yantina, please.
Hi. So I'm not going to say much more about mentorship, I guess, beyond what Ainsley said. And I think these things are similar. But in addition, so if I don't repeat things, it's because I don't want to repeat. But but I support a lot of those ideas. In addition, for me, what I would say is that mentorship is really enriching for the mentor as well as the mentee. So if done well, it's a role that I really thoroughly enjoy as an academic. Is much more than supervision. Is actually mentorship, because if you do it well, you nurture and grow people, and you support them, and you support them to fulfill themselves fully, and that requires you to understand them, right? To understand the individuals, understand their scholarship, their desires, and where they'd like to go, and how you can make that happen, or how you can help them see the logical next step that they ought to take. So something that is really enriching for me. I think, and Supriya, this follows on from the quote that you gave. Mentorship is something that is a little bit disruptive, because I think partly having really good mentors is what can make or break an academic career. And a good mentor opens up opportunities, introduces you to their networks, encourages you to apply for particular opportunities, and so on and so forth. And for me, in the work that I do at UCT, it is very actively finding talent, but then also very actively mentoring talent or talented individuals, so that they become the next scientists that or ethicists that contribute in the global space, is really important. So mentorship is disruptive, because it and this is, I think, what your quote tried to say, is it's a tool to break open power structures. And then lastly, the thing that I would say is that I've benefited tremendously from some excellent mentors. From my original PhD supervisor, Mike Parker, who some of you might know, who's just brilliant at that role, and to when I joined UCT, somebody who has since passed away is Professor Mogani Mayosi, who came at it from a completely different angle, but is a medical doctor, but was so supportive, and just really gave me wings to fly, and so on and so forth. So mentoring and mentorship are enriching for both parties, absolutely imperative. And if you don't have a mentor, you need to look for one, is what I would say.
Thank you, Anthina. This is like, it leads me to question so many aspects of how people, find a good mentor, but we can go back to this question later during our conversations. So next, Muthoni, could you please share your thoughts?
Yeah, okay, good. I think, yeah, just allow me not to use my camera because it's having a challenge. Yeah. So mentoring for me as an academic where I teach undergraduates is an exciting opportunity, mainly because I get to practice what we call active listening, and also a platform where I get to share my knowledge with students and share ideas. So for me, I even to just get to hear students' opinion, get to hear their worries, get to that opportunity to advise them, and also just get to see them, to listen to their success stories after they leave the campus and they meet me on the streets and they tell me about what they are doing. So for me, I see mentorship as an opportunity to impact someone's life, in a positive way. And also to be able to actively listen, because listening for me, especially being a lawyer, is a skill that must always be honed each and every time, because as lawyers, we always want to be heard. So my experience with mentorship, the first that I recall was when I was an undergraduate student. I had this wonderful thesis supervisor, and I'm not really sure if at that time I knew she was my mentor or she knew she was my mentor, but I was always in her office having conversations. She always gave me the time. So at that time, as an undergraduate, with all honesty, I didn't know that she was actually my mentor and I was actually a mentee. But the relationship could be defined one as a mentor-mentee, because she did offer me so many advice. And as a matter of fact, it is through her that I was able to do my master's. She was able to encourage me in terms of my ideas and my goals in the academia. And yeah. Now, in terms of my mentees at the undergraduate level, of course, we don't have a structured program for mentorship, but I do find spaces where I can have an open door policy and have students come in and just talk me through their ideas, their worries about being which area of law, because law is quite diverse. And of course, as someone who is interested in biomedical law, they do come to me and I'm able to talk to them more about this particular space. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you, Muthoni. So we'll get back to this question of structured program for mentorship. I think that's an interesting line of thought which we need to pick up later, definitely. Sunita?
Thanks, Supriya. As some of the panelists have said, this is a very interesting theme, and thank you for having me over here. So give me an alert when I'm sort of close to my 3 minutes or 2 minutes. So I just looked up what the mentor means, and it's very interesting to see the etymology of the word mentor. So it has Greek origin, it has Latin origin, and it has Sanskrit origin. And in Sanskrit, it says that, the one who thinks, in Latin, it suggests the kind of, monitoring and kind of have the mandate to admonish the mentees, etc. So I thought, none of this really holds true in the contemporary context. Definitely not for me, just because as I hear a number of you, the panelists who spoke earlier, that it is, for me, it's a co-learning space and it's a peer learning space. I'm not in academic setting, so I work in the development sector, civil society, in NGO sector in India, but very closely linked with the academic setting, and I teach at some of the universities. We run our own programs, and so just to kind of to simplify what I want to say is, I could really see the non-academic and academic as two broad kind of spaces that I am engaged with. And why I think that the conception of mentor, traditionally the way it has been conceived, doesn't hold in either of the spaces. So let's say in the academia, at least in Indian context, it is only developing as a discipline in recent time, just about a decade. And, so we have very few universities and schools which offer the programs, master's program. So it's a fairly kind of, people who sit or sign up for this master's program are quite exposed, and, they know what they're doing. And so this power imbalance in the teacher training or mentee mentor doesn't really work that way, so it is our responsibility as I would call not even faculty, but as facilitators, to ensure that it becomes a peer learning space. And the power symmetry, there is always power symmetry, but it could also be reverse power symmetry, just because we get people from across the disciplines. And so if I have just kind of, my basic training in, let's say, in social sciences and ethics training, but we get students or the mentees or the course participant coming from varieties of diverse discipline. And so it really has to be kind of, the conviction amongst us as facilitators need to be as peer educators or peer learners, and we should be willing to learn from them and be open-minded. The non-academic spaces, once again, I run a lot of short duration intensive programs in subfields of bioethics. So as a result, what happens is we get the audience or the program participants are fairly senior professionals. They are practitioners. They bring a lot of wealth of kind of insights from their own practice, and bring very difficult questions to the table. for the facilitators to respond to. So once again, it's a mixed bag of the question. They do have conundrums, but they really want to know how a practical problem needs to be resolved. And we need to be really agile. And that again becomes a very, very peer learning, co-learning space for me. So for me, to be a mentor or to be a facilitator is really to be in the space of peer learning, where there's a level playing field, and it is kind of collective responsibility to make sure that every voice, every perspective is heard. And I heard one of the panelists earlier saying that it is extremely enriching to be in that space. So that's what the mentorship is for me. And some of the panelists also have said what it has been to be a mentee, or to be with the other professionals in the academic setting. I was privileged to be in the academic setting to pursue my senior research fellowship, etc. And so I think I also learned a lot in those Western universities, the kind of equitable relationship and the flat relationship between the sort of youngsters or the emerging scholars, not so much about the age, but the discipline wise. And I think that shaped quite a bit as what I should be doing in bioethics spaces. And back home, I think I just want to take like another 30 seconds. I'm also closely linked with the civil society spaces. And so we get kind of, get to engage with some of the audiences in our programs. Currently, I'm part of one program where we are kind of, providing inputs and orientation to community-based public health professionals. So that's a very different space, and once again, very challenging for us as facilitators to really make the platform very level playing. And I think I'll speak to some of those challenges when we move forward in this webinar. Thanks, Supriya. Back to you, please.
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you. I can see this, how co-learning and peer learning is very emphasized, and how we can reverse the power asymmetry within, by taking the transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary perspectives into account. So, Des?
Yeah, thanks, Supriya. And thank you. I think we've had so many wonderful points so far. I'm relatively early in my career, very early in my career, and I think I've experienced more of the mentee perspective. So maybe there's some more that I can add on to what's been said there. I also have piloted and co-run a mentoring network, or we've launched recently this year for the UK Postgraduate Bioethics Committee, and I think it's interesting to think about the mentees' perspectives there too. So in my own experience, I've had mentorship throughout master's training and DPhil, and now as a postdoc. And I think that there are a lot of different things that we might look for through mentorship. And we surveyed the people who were initially interested in joining the UK Bioethics Postgrad Network about what they were after from their mentoring relationships. And a lot of the time, I think it comes down to a few of the things that some of the other panelists have highlighted, this idea about other researchers having access to networks and resources, and even just know-how about what are essential events in the bioethics space. How do you get to know people? What are the kind of journals that you should be looking at? There's so much knowledge that I think people come to, often from quite different or isolated areas, and mentorship can really, I think it's really valued often for the opportunity to learn more through that professional network, and about the resources that are available, and how to build up the beginnings of a career in the right way. And I think for myself and others as well, one of the important things that we don't talk about so much is the way that mentorship can be encouraging and can counteract negative experiences that we have as well. A lot of us will have experienced barriers to access, or will have experienced particular negative experiences of, interactions with academics in the area, and that can be very off-putting, and that's not anything that I have experienced recently, certainly, but I think that you know, for those of us who have had those experiences in the past, having a supportive mentor and having someone who is there to tell you, you know, it's not all like that, and academia doesn't have to be like that, and that's not representative of the people in this field. That can be really important too, and particularly for those who have had negative relationships with other academics in the area in the past. I think that can be important, but also, you know, even if things are going fantastically well, as an early career scholar, I think it's just important to have a diverse array of people who you can draw on for support, and just knowing and having the security of someone who, you know, you have that positive learning relationship with can be really important.
Thank you so much.
I think that's all I have.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is like very important, which you touched upon, even when you have negative experiences and then building a, you know, solid positive relationships, not just with one mentor, but having multiple mentors based on your needs and what kind of resources and access which one needs for their career, right? So this is really a great point. Now it goes back to the question, which I'm thinking out loud, like when the larger academia, especially in bioethics, which is much more from global north, like publications and everything is focused. And not many trained bioethicists exist within the larger, you know, like global South region in that sense. How do we facilitate and what kind of role do mentors who are situated through the collaboration, many collaborative projects exist, and how do you think that, how do we set boundaries and how to be a good mentor? Any thoughts on those? Like when you have this lot of exchanges within global North and global South and in the collaborative projects. Any thoughts, Ainsley, on this?
Yeah, I don't think I have a magic answer for you, but I think one for me as a person who lives in the global north, albeit on the south side of the global north in Australia, I think it is imperative for me to recognise and acknowledge my privilege and to use that privilege to, when it's wanted, to assist folks who may not have the same privileges for whatever reason and whatever kind. And in research projects or global collaborations of any kind, I think it is about being open, and it is about, as I said earlier, I think fostering connection. And if there are kind of things that are norms and just kind of accepted knowledge in my field, assuming that knowledge is appropriate in other contexts too, which usually I would hope it would be. And if that knowledge was not held or accessible to others, then it would be my job to help to share those knowledges and make them more accessible and to break down implicit norms in the field as well. And I think something that's super interesting about bioethics is, in some ways, I think we have a lot of norms that are just kind of part and parcel of being a person in an academic setting or being a person in a setting where bioethics is relevant. But I also think we have an enormous opportunity in bioethics because we are a relatively comparably young field. And we're also a field where the norms aren't necessarily agreed yet and can differ depending on where you are. And I actually had this noted as a point that we could come back to if we have time around understanding the fact that different norms can come from different places in which you work, the different methods that you use in your work, the different questions that you might work on. And certainly I even think in the global north, there are distinctions between how bioethics is practiced depending on where you are. And it's about, I guess, making sure that that is open and recognised and that we come to that with a critical eye ready. I also think, it's a huge job to, just foster opportunity as much as possible. And where it's requested, I'm always mindful of not jumping in and trying to save the day when help is not needed or wanted. I'm always mindful of attempting to check in to make sure that if I'm going to try and work with a person, I want to make sure that they actually want to do that as well.
Thank you, Ainsley. Yantina and Sunita, this is a question which I was thinking, placed in the Global South, like when there is no formal mentorship programs, how do you think, I mean, is it much more burden? I mean, should I use the word burden on scholars who thinks like proactively, playing the role of mentor? Or how do you think we can push or challenge or resist in certain ways when you don't have formal mentorship, programs? Are there ways, what are your ideas and thoughts on these? Sunita?
So thanks. And once again, probably a somewhat challenging question, but, I'm really drawing upon my exposure to the collaborative research, which involved sort of, global North and global South researchers. And this is about over 20 years time span, if I could sort of, just narrow down the scope of that work. And I realized that, there's always a pressure on, even on the senior professionals here in the global South, to really be assertive when things are not really working out, things are not equitable, be it the opportunities, be it the authorship credits, be it the access to resources of different kinds. And I think, this whole understanding of collaborative research ethics, and I think that there's something about the inequity, which is kind of, even in the academia between global South and North, it's so entrenched that even senior professionals, and I'm really talking about the full professors in the academic setting, and I was quite stunned when I experienced that, being part of some certain projects and not really putting their foot down or being assertive about, let's say, for example, the sort of, capacity strengthening. If there's a collaborative grant, and, we should be really demanding capacity strengthening, resource allocation in the way the funds and the budgets are designed, So I think, just sort of, the way, if you look at the colonial kind of, the legacies that has been left, and I think at least in certain spaces, including academia, people do find it difficult to get out of those kind of, traps. They might know subtly that this is not right, but at the same time, there are lots of other pressures that you have to really take on. Some of the responsibilities, there are big grants, big money. So it is the survival question for the institution. Prestige is attached to those grants, etc., etc. So I think, some of us have, and once again, I think I'm also privileged because I had an opportunity to get myself trained in the at the University of Toronto. I was sort of really privileged. I was also privileged in the space in the civil society and the NGO, which were so much more liberal, progressive, sort of, really kind of, looking for the equitable environment between seniors and juniors, and really sort of, create that kind of a the flat kind of a sort of, horizontal spaces there, and all of that really contributed. And I think, just want to connect with your question, Supriya, but just wanted to draw upon these kind of realities, and probably this still remains in certain spaces. And so some of us who are exposed to the kind of, the collaborative research ethics, and if we want to connect it to the mentorship, I think, that could become really central thread as how we can sort of, disrupt those colonial legacies, which are kind of very entrenched, and somehow we find it difficult mentally to come out of those sort of, traps. I'll stop here, Supriya. Thank you.
Sunita. Yantina?
So I would have a completely different response, actually, because I think that the challenge that you're speaking about is a systemic challenge, and mentorship is never going to change that problem, right? It's a systemic, and it's not going to change that problem because the mentorship relation is an individual one. So it's the relationship between two individuals, right? It's a deeply personal relationship that requires a curiosity in the other, right? Inequality is a systemic problem, right? And it's a global problem, and not just in the global North-South division. I mean, we know about this in terms of race, gender, and so on and so forth, right? These inequalities are pervasive, and mentorship can't solve that problem. But mentorship can be an act of activism, I think, and that is what it is for me. And I think I was getting from Supriya and Ainsley kind of a similar sense that a decision to mentor a particular person because you believe in them, right? Because they offer something that you recognize as being really valuable and important and worthy, and then deciding, I wonder if Mutoni has, some of what Mutoni was saying was also veering in that direction. You recognize something in that other person that you want to nurture and support, and you want to see that person become successful. And if you do that, and if you are interested in activism, right? If our scholarship is a form of activism of its own accord, and if through being selective about who you mentor, you try to disrupt the power balance, right? You can try to have an effect on the globe, on the bigger world, but at the heart of the mentorship relationship is that personal, that curiosity in the other, and that transcends some of these questions. I mean, I'm a feminist scholar, I think, right? I'm not a feminist scholar. I'm a feminist and a scholar, but that doesn't mean that I only mentor women, right? So there doesn't place a priori boundaries on who I select to mentor, but I do need to recognize that the person that I invest my time in shares some fundamental values with me, I think.
Great, thank you. This is like an interesting thought. On one hand, mentorship is situated within the larger institutional, structures, which definitely perpetuate certain kind of power dynamics and injustice which we have. But at the same time, as Yantina says, it's a personal relationship with a mentee. But then the question now I'm thinking, but I will, direct it to Tess and Mutoni here. As a mentee, what are your expectations, or what are our expectations from the mentorship, and how do we set certain boundaries from this particular mentorship relationship, and how do you think that would influence your relationship with particular mentor? Any thoughts on this, Tess?
Yeah, thanks, Supriya. I think that was some really interesting discussion that Yantina brought up. And I think this idea of the selectivity, though, kind of scares me at the same time, because we have mentors who may be very aware of this and maybe trying to counteract biases and trying to disrupt power structures. At the same time, I think that I don't really know how much people tend to stumble into mentor-mentee relationships. And as a mentee, I guess something that I worry about is who has access to mentoring simply by virtue of having a louder voice, or being more present at the kinds of meetings where people are thinking about mentoring. And because I think that's maybe not a boundary, maybe I'm not addressing the question very well, but that just really made me think, I think some people might be trying to be selective in a really positive way. And at the same time, if you have a certain group who has a louder voice or who has a greater expectation of having access to mentoring and who is going to really push for that kind of a relationship and feel more confident in going up and addressing more senior academics and stuff like that, then you're going to have a selection towards that group of people having access to mentoring and then having access to the benefits that come with mentoring. And I do think that maybe we could be doing more in terms of some of these programs and the way that they develop, and in terms of creating a culture around everybody having an expectation of access to mentoring on both sides, that might be really important there. And I think, that can inform some of the boundaries as well. As a mentee, you need to have boundaries about what you are expecting from a mentoring relationship, and the kinds of things that will come up in discussion. And I think that, I don't really think of having too many boundaries beyond, what's appropriate in a normal professional kind of interaction. But I think that thinking about, the context in which that mentee mentor relationship is happening is really important.
Okay. Thank you. Mutoni, like the same question which I follow up, but then I'm thinking out loud, the challenges as a mentee within the global south situation, but working within the larger bioethics discipline, which drives on the similar neoliberal targets, like the publication we need to think about, or like how do we strive for certain, if you are in academia, we have the certain set of hierarchy and ladders which we climb, and then the structure doesn't facilitate us. But still, there is ways one navigates and resists this. So do you have any thoughts on this, Mutoni?
Yeah, thank you, Supriya. But maybe if you would allow me just to go back and just give some feedback on the issue of structured mentorship and also the boundaries aspect. So in my opinion, I think mentorship is mentee relationship is intentional. It's intentional at the master's level, at the PhD level. But in my experience as a lecturer for the undergraduate students, sometimes students come and they are unaware of mentor-mentee kind of relationship and the importance of it. And I see it as an undergraduate lecturer that by default, by just being a lecturer, then I am also a mentor. And that's what I meant when I feel like we don't have a structured kind of format for it for our undergraduates. So when they move on to masters, they may have challenges in actually appreciating, in approaching a mentor. And so in my opinion, in terms of issues of boundaries, when it comes to the master's and PhD, postdoc kind of mentor-mentee relationship, the boundaries may be determined because you have, it's more personalized and the two parties do determine what are the boundary levels. We cannot say this is it, it's for them to decide. But for the undergraduate, you have a class of 200 and you have to be intentional. You have to, maybe I see it as a responsibility. Being a mentor for me is a responsibility to my students to make sure that they are self-aware, to make sure that they are aware they can speak to me in terms of goal setting outside the classroom, because I teach medical law, I teach legal writing. But when I look at the students, they are quite young, they are 18, 19, and I feel that how can I speak to them in terms of goal setting? Are you self-aware? Do you know where you want to go with your degree? Do you know the options that are available? So in that particular space, you may not have a personalized, it may only become personal when the student now follows you back for office hours consultation, yeah? But when you're speaking in the lecture hall, of course, you could have 5 minutes and just say something that relates to mentorship to encourage the students, to give them some thoughts about that, yeah? So when you talk about the challenges, so in my view, I feel that if as a lecturer, you are not aware that you are a mentor, then you cannot mentor anyone. You will grow up, you will be successful in your career, but if you're not conscious and intentional about being a mentor, then you'll end up being successful and not having the opportunity to speak or to influence or to be part of someone else's success in the same academic space. So how this challenge can be, I see it, how can it be addressed? I think universities must be intentional about mentorship. I don't know so much about other countries, but in my country, we are a developing country. So everything is always developing. So I do feel that being also in a public university is a whole different ball game, because you're fighting bureaucracy, you're fighting traditions. So you have to introduce mentorship. You have to sell it and make it look like something that is beautiful and acceptable, because already there are systems in place, and it would require a change of these systems to introduce mentorship, to make it intentional. And yeah, I think, I don't know if at some point I answered your question.
Right. I mean, I can clearly see what Anthina and then Mutoni is having this line of thought, but being intentional. On the other hand, I can see the larger institutional issues which Tess highlighted, which I can see the link. Now I'm not going to expect a magic answer what Chainsley was also trying to say, but I'm going to just put it out there as a question, and then please feel free to reflect on this by any of the panelists. How do we find the so-called godmother or godfather in academia if you want to survive? I know like everyone wants it, but how do we do it? I mean, if you wanted to very consciously and intentionally we practice it and find the right mentor, what are your thoughts on this? How do we do it? I mean, for the ECRs especially. Any thoughts? Yes, Ainsley.
Thanks, Supriya. I'd say a couple of things to start with. I think the first thing, bearing in mind that this network and the stated purpose of the evening, which is particularly to focus on neoliberal contexts and structural aspects around mentorship, is doing exactly what you've done this evening, which is, or this evening for me, I should add, probably different times of day for the rest of you, doing exactly what you've done, which is to bring the conversation to the front. So I think that's so important, because what we're doing here is articulating the norm of mentorship and the importance of mentorship, and the fact that we all have a legitimate expectation of good mentorship as part of our growth as scholars in the field. So I think that's one thing to do. And actually, if we were to formalize that a little bit more, I think we would think about, well, what can we do for those who may not have access to the types of interventions where that can become a reality? So how do we make that more transparent, more accessible for folks who just for whatever reason may not be able to access it in their everyday scholarship? And I think the other thing to do, because you're sort of, how do you find the godmother, godfather? It's kind of around trying people on, I think, is one thing to do, is to try it out with a few folks. And you get us, or to ask for an introduction. So you could find another person who might be having a great mentoring experience and ask them to recommend someone. You could find someone, you could ask a person who you're already working with, but you think may not be suitable, maybe if they're a direct supervisor or something like that. So you find access to people that way. I think also access to platforms like Zoom, which we're using today, is fantastic, because it just, apart from time zones, it just makes it so much more accessible. And even WhatsApp or other things using a smartphone have made it much more accessible than it was. And so, but trying people on is a really key thing. And I think one other thing I was going to get to, but we might get to this in a more formal way later, is sort of knowing when a mentorship relationship isn't going in the direction that you want it to do, and actually accepting, whether as a mentor or a mentee. And it could also be in a less negative way. I know Tess has talked about using mentorship to kind of overcome negative experiences, but sometimes the mentorship itself can also be negative. I've had some that are frankly adversarial. For me as a mentee, I hope I haven't been an adversarial mentor, but so I've come out of some mentoring meetings feeling much worse than when I went in, and that's, to me at least, not what it's for. And so I think there's a time when you can say, do you know what, this isn't working. And you can sometimes articulate the reason, and you sometimes can't, but you just need to feel confident to say, thanks so much. Think about what you said. Move on. If it's I think we could also distinguish a little bit between formal and informal mentorship systems, because if it's a formal system, your mechanism to provide feedback about the fit is much easier, because there's a confidential third party who you can just go to and speak to about that. If it's an informal mentoring relationship, that can be a bit trickier. I feel like I'm straying a little bit from your question now, but the only other thing I was going to say is that sometimes mentorship has a natural endpoint as well, and that's great. So I mentored someone recently who just said, thanks so much. You've answered all my questions. I don't feel like we need to meet again right now. I still see her in the hallways and we catch up, which is really nice. But actually, we did what we set out to do, and we didn't have to continue for the sake of it. So, you don't have to, whereas I'm mentoring someone else at the moment who's also awesome. And that person said, I really want someone who's in it for the long haul with me. And I'm like, that's okay. I don't think I'm going to retire soon, so I can do that. And let's go. So we're a much more, we're already building our relationship with a view to being in touch for a very long time period. So, so I guess trying people on, and knowing to walk away when it's not working for you if you can't turn it around, I think is a key thing.
Right, thank you.
And also, yeah, and transparently helping, making it visible, I think is really important, but you've already begun to do that with this event.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ainsley. Anyone else on panelists want to just quickly share a few thoughts? Yes, Tina?
Share a few because I do need to run off for another meeting. So the one is, and I think it was Mutoni who said this, is a lot of this is accidental and not intentional. And a lot of this you recognize post hoc, not proactively. So it's often afterwards that you realize like that person actually was mentoring me. I didn't appreciate or recognize it at the time. So that's the one thing to say is that sometimes it is about bumping into the right person at the right time. But then I think part of how you get a mentor is to first of all recognize that you would like one, right? So articulate that to yourself. Have an idea about what you would like from that person, right? Is there a particular idea you want to run past them? Is it support in general? Is it navigating a career? Like what is it that you would like from that mentorship relationship? And then networking, right? Getting your voice out there, connecting to people, sometimes just dropping a line, right? Like to someone whose work inspires you. And sending an email and say, oh, your work really inspires me. I'm struggling. I'm this and this person from here and there. I'd love to have a conversation about whatever. And so network at conferences, walking up to people and talking about your work, and I think is really important. And then I know we're running out of time, but mentoring up. So yes, sometimes mentors are people that have gone before you in your career. So regardless where you are, so Tess, for instance, it can already start mentoring other people, right? So the moment that you are somewhere, you can mentor others. And that's how it works. So mentoring starts at any point, but also you can mentor you can find a mentor who is at your career stage as well. So one of my most effective mentors at UCT at the moment is someone I met at a mentorship event where neither of us found a mentor, but we found each other. And we've been meeting up and we're exactly where we're at the same career stage. It's been tremendously helpful to have somebody to bounce ideas off. So it's not always about magic. Sometimes it's not always about the grandmother or grandfather. It's actually, or whatever you call it, sometimes it's somebody who you already know.
Thank you, Tina. I know like we are running out of time, so I would like to welcome like more questions and thoughts from everyone here so that we can wrap up. I know we are a bit really late. Any questions or any thoughts? Just to put it out there. Yeah.
I have a quick question, really. I'm wondering how much there's, in terms of working towards more formalized systems or more accessible systems with more mentorship happening, is there a need for there to be more professional recognition when mentoring occurs? Like, is there any kind of, there are definitely informal rewards that people receive for their mentorship. Is there a need for more formal rewards for mentors as part of that process? Or is that something that people feel, is this like an unpaid labor situation, or is it kind of mutually beneficial? We're happy to do this.
I can jump in about that super quickly. One thing to say, Tess, is that I think there's two kinds of rewards. One's we've already mentioned, which is the just learning fantastic things about interesting people and having that curiosity. The other thing, though, is that in the structures of a neoliberal setting that we all sometimes, a lot of us operate in, is that we are rewarded in different ways. So we're rewarded through promotion, mentorship, and evidence of mentorship is part of promotion structures. And it's also a part of our track record section for grant applications. So we are evaluated on how we do it and how well we do it. And we are asked to share stories of our attitude and our success in mentoring, obviously in an anonymized way when we do those kinds of things. But I would like to think that we don't necessarily need to be strategic in that regard, in the sense that it is a fulfilling thing to do, regardless of those activities or those benefits that come with it.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Ainsley.
Yeah, thanks. So we have another 20 minutes for Q&A session, like open for all. Please, any questions, you can just chat it, put on the chat box or even openly just unmute yourself and ask questions. Any questions? I'm giving a few seconds more. Yes, Faith?
Hi, everyone. I wanted to ask a question about finding balance about doing what you're passionate about and sometimes just finding a job or opportunity. Like, how do you balance it?
Anyone would like to pitch in, respond, Faith's question?
It's a really challenging question. It's a good question to ask. I think sometimes you take the best thing that's in front of you, even if it's not perfect, and then you can do two things. I guess you can continue to look for the opportunity that you think is better suited, or you work within the opportunity that you have to make it better suited to your needs. At the end of the day, we all have to meet our expenses for the lives that we lead. And so sometimes we do have to be pragmatic. But I would urge anyone who is in that situation to think about where they want to go. And while they're in a position, even if it's not the best one, to think about how they can make that next step or what they might do to identify those new opportunities.
Yes, Olivia. Thank you, Antina. Olivia?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the discussion. So I think my question is really around how do we actually get people who really need mentorship to understand the value of mentorship and to be able to get to that position where they can actually articulate that for themselves? Because I find that a lot of the times, like, I've been very successful, I think, in having mentors for various reasons, but I come to talks like this also. So I come and then I learn more, but I'm also one of the people who have more knowledge on how to do that. So I wonder, how do we, in different contexts, coming from an African context where I know a lot of people don't have exposure to such information, and then I'm currently based in the US, where I see a very different experience where people from early on high school, early years, primary school, they're already cognizant in a way that they need to be on the lookout for mentors. They need to be reaching out to people, sending emails, being intentional. So how do we get the message across to a large number of young people and youth who don't necessarily know or even aware of where to begin, I think?
Sunita? Do you have any response?
Yes, a very brief response to Olivia. And I think at least in bioethics spaces that I'm familiar with, there are lots of networks. And I think I have myself have benefited over the time in terms of getting to know and finding peers who share your interest areas, who resonate with you in terms of the kind of, if I can label it as a school of thought in a particular thematics. And I think, some of those networks have been really, really helpful. And even it sort of, going back to the earlier conversation, finding once again, and I think Olivia's question is connected to that. The networks are really important. And I really feel that we should never shy away from really kind of, sending out and reaching out to people by email or whatever context you have. At the most, you might not hear from that person, but at least you can make an attempt to reach out. And my experience in bioethics and even in the health sector that I work in, the sort of, the broader canvas of health, it's rarely that people don't revert. People will revert saying that I don't have time, this is not my area of expertise, etc., etc. But people tend to kind of respond and revert, and I think that is the space that you can make that opportunity for the conversation and have some kind of a communication. And that's also a way of establishing your own personal networks in that space, even if nothing works out as mentor and mentee, but you develop that kind of a sort of academic capital for yourself. And I think in the long run, it's really helpful that people know you as a bioethicist in that space, and it's kind of has value of its own, both for your own interest, but I think it's also for the network that such and such person with such and such expertise lives in this area, whatever XYZ. And so I think I really feel that bioethics space is full of various networks, and one can choose and select which networks you want to. There are also lots of kind of newsletters and digests. We ourselves kind of run a what is it called, fortnightly digest, and it carries a lot of information. It's like a information outlet for many people, just to kind of keep track of what's happening. So sort of fairly mundane kind of things, but very doable, feasible, and accessible information, just because of the internet as well, regardless of where one is located in around the globe. Over. Thank you.
Sylvia, you had a question. Sylvia is not around here. Okay.
If I could add to that, I think one thing, Supriya, that might be an interesting addition that's starting to happen a bit more often seems, well, actually, I'm not really sure if this used to happen much before or not, but I like the idea of conferences integrating the launch of networking, not just networking, but mentoring relationships as part of the conferences as well. And that might not be a way that we can reach out to all people who should have access to mentoring, but at least, you can get you've got large groups of people. There are these opportunities to offer mentoring as part of the conference experience. And I think that, as Ainsley, you've said, I think, and a few others, like the idea of that having benefited from that in the past, or I know that's something that we're hoping to do at the next Oxford Global Health and Bioethics conference in June, is to have some kind of a mentoring element as a part of that. And I think it's just a really good idea to give people that initial taste and that initial access to something that they can then take forward from there. So maybe that can help to,
definitely. Thanks, Tess. I was thinking about to ask this question, like how, let's say, as an association, International Association of Bioethics, or multiple networks which we have, like, for postgraduate students, whether it's UK or whether it's in Europe, ACME is there. So there are multiple networks. Even in Australasia, they have this one network for ECRs. And how do we bridge using the existing platforms, whether it's conferences, whether it's a national conferences, which happens in India, or the international conferences or World Bioethics Congresses, providing the space. I think it's very important to make sure. But then the question is how effective we can make it is another set of questions I was thinking out loud. How do we make it effective? Mentorship program, which is not for a short term, not just for a 1 hour or a half day. I know, as you said, it's like a starter. Then how do we keep it sustaining? Of course, is it more of a job for ECRs? Definitely. But I think, would it a formal mentorship programs, which would it sustain? I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on this? Like, do formal mentorship programs help and facilitate long-lasting relationships? Anyone? But any other questions, please?
We're of course piloting this mentorship program, in the UK network at the moment, and we have 1 or 2 people here who have been involved in that. And I think the jury's out at this point. We're doing a year-long iteration, and there's a launch event. People sign up. We try to match them to a mentor with similar experiences. And then kind of lead them to it and say, please meet up over the next 6 months for a couple of coffees or online on Zoom, and take it from there, and then check back in and have a bit of a social gathering at the end of the year. But there's a lot there that has to come from the interest and the curiosity between the 2 people, and there's so much that relies on individual motivation, isn't there?
All right. Yeah. Yes, Ainsley?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Tess is saying. I think not even necessarily specific to bioethics, but just more generally, I think if we're talking about formal structures, I think it's really important to build in an evaluation into the program that you're doing, and that evaluation can have a midpoint check-in. And then at the time when a sort of, it's been going for long enough, then having another evaluation as well. And that's in confidence, and you evaluate with both mentors and mentees just to sort of see. I think another aspect of a good mentoring program is providing some materials that sort of describe what mentoring is, describe some ground rules and expectations. It just because not everybody has had experience with this either as a mentee or a mentor, and so it's kind of useful for everyone, I think, to have a course set and to make the materials for each of the people involved in the partnership available to either of them. And I think, this kind of sustainability question is a really important one as well, because it takes time. It takes time to coordinate, as Tess is probably finding out. It takes time to do it well. And then when you're done, you need someone else ready to take over the reins to do that sustaining and coordination as well. So I think as much as possible, placing it into the hands of organizations that have that sustainability inbuilt is a really good idea. At the same time, I think we can't just limit it to conferences, because not everybody gets to go, particularly at the moment, for lots of different reasons. So I think social media can be a fantastic mechanism here to either run formal or informal mentoring, and organizations that have free or exceedingly low cost membership that are bioethics or bioethics adjacent would be really good as well, to sort of bring this out into the open. Or if you're running a conference, is to open up your mentoring program to people who aren't going for whatever reason, but who are interested in accessing that as a structural benefit. If it's very low cost to you and you've got the numbers to be able to sustain it, I think opening it up to make it broader would be really good as well.
Great, definitely. So I know we are running out of time now. So thank you so much. I think to summarize, I can see there are different ways of seeing the mentorship, right? On one hand, it's an intentional, but at the same time, trying to personalize, but directing to the people who really need, and based on the need-based assessment, one can mentor different mentees at different career stages too. So definitely one, we need to reflect on how much we can bridge this gap and to make sure the mentorship accessible to everyone, because we know that the intersecting factors play a huge role to not access everyone to have this, like a long-term mentorship relationship. But definitely on sometimes it's accidental and we find a great mentor. Sometimes we learn from negative experiences and we become sometimes a good mentor, or hoping we become a good mentor. That also does certainly happen. So so before winding up, are there any quick thoughts? Or we can say bye and then we'll see you all again in the next session. Any quick thoughts? Summary, anything? Okay, then thank you so much, Ainsley, Sunita, Tess, and Mutoni, and Frayantina for being here and to really reflect on this. It's important we talk about this, I think, more often. So hopefully we'll continue the conversations with the next sessions. One of the sessions we're having on navigating the challenges very specifically. So we are hyper-focused on negative experiences. So I don't know how that would turn out. I'm curious. So thank you so much for everyone here. And see you all for the next session then. Thank you.
Thank you, Supriya, and other friends and colleagues here. It was great.